The snowstorm hit harder than anyone expected that night. The wind howled like 1,000 voices crying through the trees, and the small cabin, tucked deep in the Montana woods, trembled with every gust. Inside, a single mother named Hannah Porter, barely 30, sat huddled near the fireplace with her 8-year-old son Ely wrapped in a blanket beside her. Outside, the storm was a white blur, fierce, merciless, endless. She hadn't seen a soul in 3 days, and the isolation was starting to feel heavier than the snow piling against her door. But what she didn't know was that this night, a simple act of compassion would change her life forever, and draw the attention of hundreds of people she'd never met. Before we dive into this incredible true story of courage and kindness, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Soul Spark, and hit that bell icon, because stories like this remind us what humanity truly means. It began with a distant rumble, faint but steady. At first, Hannah thought it was thunder echoing through the valley, but when the rumble grew louder, she realized it was the low growl of engines. Motorcycles. Out here. In this blizzard. She stood and peered out through the frost-covered window, but all she could see was the faint flicker of headlights moving slowly through the white haze. Then came the pounding on the door. She hesitated, her hand frozen halfway to the knob. Out here, miles from town, she wasn't used to visitors, especially not at night, especially not 20-something leather-clad strangers. But then she heard the voice, rough but desperate, shouting over the wind, "Mom, we mean no harm.
Please, we're freezing out here."
Her heart pounded. She glanced at Ely, who looked up with frightened eyes, clutching his blanket tighter. "It's okay?" she whispered, mostly to herself. Then she unlatched the door. The cold hit like a slap, and snow blasted in through the crack. Standing there were a group of 25 bikers, their beards coated in frost, their hands trembling, and their jackets stiff with ice. Their leader, a tall man with silver in his beard and sorrow in his eyes, stepped forward. "We were riding back from a veterans' meet," he said, his voice trembling from the cold. "The storm caught us off guard. We can't go any further. Our bikes are dead, and one of our guys can't feel his hands anymore." For a second, Hannah's instincts screamed to close the door. A lone woman and her child in the middle of nowhere. Taking in 25 bikers sounded like something from a nightmare. But when she looked into the man's eyes, she saw not danger, but exhaustion, desperation, humanity. And without thinking further, she opened the door wide and said, "Come in, all of you." The men shuffled in, stomping snow from their boots, their breath misting in the air. The cabin was small, 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a fireplace, but somehow they made it work. They took off their jackets and gloves, rubbing their hands near the fire. One of them, barely in his 20s, was crying quietly, the frostbite already turning his fingers pale. Hannah grabbed an old pot and filled it with water to warm his hands. The bikers thanked her over and over, their leader introducing himself as Mark Beer Henson, president of a veteran biker club called Iron Shields. Most of them were ex-military, riding to raise money for homeless vets. "We've seen war zones with more mercy than this storm," Bear muttered, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. Hannah made soup from what little she had, canned beans, pasta, and some dried herbs. She handed out every blanket, every towel, every scrap of warmth she could find. Eli, at first scared, started handing out mugs of hot cocoa with his tiny hands, earning soft smiles and quiet thanks from the towering men. The cabin filled with the smell of food, steam, and something rare on such a night, gratitude. Hours passed, and the wind still howled. The men took turns sleeping on the floor, near the fire, or even sitting up against the walls. Hannah stayed awake most of the night, tending to the fire and making sure everyone was warm. She looked around at the strangers snoring softly in her living room. These huge men who looked so fierce yet slept like weary children, and felt an odd peace settle in her heart. Morning came quietly. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silent world of white. Hannah stepped outside and gasped. Snowdrifts were up to her knees, but the sun was shining through a pale blue sky. The bikers slowly began to wake, stretching and laughing as if reborn. Bear approached her, his weathered face softened. "Ma'am, you didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "You saved us. Every one of us." Hannah smiled faintly. "You'd have done the same for me," she replied. But Bear shook his head. "Not everyone would have opened their door, especially not for us. They spent the morning clearing snow, fixing what they could on their bikes, and sharing breakfast from what little food was left. Before leaving, Bear handed her a small, rusted pendant, an old military tag with the words "Brothers Forever" engraved on it. "Just a little reminder," he said, "that you've got brothers out there too." Hannah didn't think much of it. She waved as the bikers rode off, one by one, disappearing down the snow-covered road. Life went back to normal. She fed Ely, cleaned up the mess, and went on with her quiet life. She figured that was the end of it, but she was wrong. The next morning, she woke to the sound of engines again, dozens of them. The rumble shook the ground. Ely ran to the window, eyes wide.
Mom, they're back!
Hannah rushed outside, her heart pounding. What she saw stopped her cold. The valley was filled with bikes, rows and rows of them, nearly 200, stretching as far as she could see. Men and women, all wearing the same iron shields patches, stood in the snow, engines idling, flags waving in the wind. Bear stepped forward again, this time with a proud smile. "We told the brothers what you did." Word spread fast. "You took in 25 of us when no one else would." So now, he looked around at the crowd behind him. "We're here to return the kindness." Hannah was speechless. I don't understand." Bear gestured, and the bikers started unloading boxes, food, firewood, tools, winter supplies. Some were carrying construction equipment. Others were pulling up with trucks full of lumber. "You said your roof leaks, right? We're fixing that. You're running low on food." "Not anymore. And that old truck that doesn't start. We've got a mechanic working on it right now." Tears filled Hannah's eyes. Ely ran out, hugging Bear's leg. The massive biker chuckled, patting the boy's head gently. "You helped us when we were frozen and scared, kiddo. Now we help you." For the next 2 days, the mountain echoed with the sound of engines, laughter, and hammers. The bikers fixed her roof, repaired the fences, stocked her pantry, and even built a small wooden shed for firewood. They left behind enough supplies to last the winter. And more than that, they left behind something Hannah hadn't felt in a long time: hope. On the final morning, when they were ready to leave, Bear handed her an envelope. "No arguments," he said with a grin. "Just open it when we're gone." Inside was a check. Enough money to pay off her late mortgage and cover Eli's school expenses for a year. Hannah stood in the snow as the 200 bikers rode off, engines roaring like thunder rolling through the valley. She clutched the pendant in her hand, the words "Brothers Forever" catching the sunlight. Her cabin, once lonely and forgotten, now felt like a home again, built not just by wood and nails, but by kindness and connection. Days later, she received letters from all over the country. People who'd heard about the story, inspired by how one small act of compassion could ripple out to touch so many lives. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Soul Spark, and share it. Because somewhere out there, one small act of kindness might be waiting to change someone's world. And as the winter sun dipped behind the mountains that night, Hannah sat by the fire with Ely, watching the light flicker on the pendant. "You see, sweetheart," she whispered softly, "kindness always finds its way back home." And out there, miles away on the open road, a group of bikers rode into the sunset, their jackets gleaming, their hearts warm, and their engines carrying the echo of a single mother's courage into every town they passed.